Adolf Hitler is at the height of his power. He's conquered Europe. For millions of Germans, he's the greatest military and strategic genius of all time. Yet the German people are about to discover that what they've been told is a tissue of lies. This is the story of how reality starts to break through the Nazis' propaganda machine. How Hitler commits the biggest military blunder of his career. And how, hidden from sight, his leadership begins to fall apart. Months after the start of the war, and Adolf Hitler appears to stride the world. He's restored Germany to greatness. His people, once fearful of war, are now reassured it will all be over very soon.
He's seen as a great war leader who seems to be delivering all the victories without the significant suffering that people still remember from World War I.
Behind him, the German people believe, stands a brilliant and united Nazi Party leadership. But then, that facade begins to crack. In the early summer of 1941, a lone German officer parachutes into a field in southern Scotland. He's quickly picked up by an amazed Home Guard and taken to London to be interrogated. At first, nobody believes his story. But then a remarkable tale emerges. The lone parachutist is none other than the Deputy Führer and Hitler's oldest associate, Rudolph Hess.
Rudolph Hess has been a leading figure in the Nazi Party since the 1920s. He's been Hitler's personal secretary throughout all of that period. So here was a man who was a big part of the Nazi machine, very well known, very famous throughout Germany.
The puzzle: what's he doing alone in Britain? Hess is held in the Tower of London. As the interrogation continues, he tells British agents he's come on a secret, one-man mission to negotiate peace with Britain. The British are astonished.
There's a sort of general sense of, well, what on earth is going on in the British establishment? It just appears increasingly as a sort of a lunatic mission.
But then a much more revealing story emerges. Hess's private mission is not really about peace at all. His main concern is that amidst the jockeying for power inside the Nazi leadership, he's losing his position as Hitler's closest confidant and ally.
He imagined that if he could pull off this diplomatic coup, it would sort of restore his own image, his own importance in the Nazi hierarchy.
It's a crazy idea. But critically, it's the first public sign that the Nazi leadership, far from being united, is a seething mass of rivalry and infighting.
It revealed really there was something rotten at the top of the Nazi party.
In Germany, Hitler learns of the secret mission in a letter left behind by Hess.
He's absolutely furious. He calls for his aides and his adjutants and shouts and screams.
This was perhaps the first time that a senior Nazi leader had broken ranks.
It was a huge crisis, and it's probably the biggest embarrassment that Hitler and the party ever experienced. Hess had betrayed the party, betrayed Hitler.
The problem for Hitler: how to maintain the illusion of a united leadership when it clearly isn't. The task of spinning the story to the German public falls to Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister. Goebbels is one of Hitler's most trusted and able cronies.
If there's a problem, Goebbels will be very good at fixing it. If there's a problem, Goebbels will be very good at representing it. If there's a problem, Goebbels will be the man to go to.
Since the outbreak of war, from his propaganda ministry in Berlin, Goebbels has exercised total control over the German media. But this is a spin doctor's nightmare. How to restore the image of a united Nazi leadership. Goebbels' answer: to present Hess as a one-off rotten apple.
Goebbels dealt with the defection of Rudolph Hess by simply portraying him as a man who had lost his reason, who had gone mad. Under the pressure of work, and his commitments had broken under the strain, effectively.
It's an answer many Germans find hard to accept.
And it certainly didn't play very well with the German public, who naturally would have asked, well, if the deputy Führer is insane, why is he still in his post?
The Hess crisis passes, but for the first time, the image of Hitler's leadership is exposed as seriously out of line with the reality. That gap is about to get much bigger. In the summer of 1941, Hitler does what he's always promised. He invades Russia. It's something he's vowed to do since the early days of the Munich beer halls. For the German Führer, it's the final showdown with his biggest enemy, communism.
It was us or them. Either Nazism conquered Soviet Bolshevism, or sooner or later, Stalin and the Soviet Union would conquer and exterminate the Germans.
As German troops storm across Russia, Hitler is also fulfilling something else he wrote about in Mein Kampf 16 years earlier. He's winning Lebensraum, conquering territories occupied by what the Nazis regard as inferior races, so that the German people should have extra living space.
Space had to be found, not in the West, that was closed, but in the East, the Slav East, that area made up of human beings who were barely human and therefore deserved no special compassion.
The German troops advance further and faster through the Soviet Union than anybody imagines possible. Within weeks, they penetrate hundreds of miles into Soviet territory. The Red Army crumbles.
They take over 1.5 million Soviet prisoners of war. It looks like Hitler is going to win the war.
Operation Barbarossa, as it's known, seems to be an extraordinary success. In Germany, there's relief and jubilation. Hitler's position as a great leader, briefly undermined by the Hess affair, is restored. To the German people, it looks as though the Führer is delivering the short war he's always promised. Communism will be defeated in weeks.
And in the autumn of 1941, Hitler gives a speech. He says Russia is destroyed and it will never rise again. He thinks he's won the war.
But then, progress slows. The Russians start to fight back. The Soviet Union calls on its vast reserves of people, many millions more than the Germans. In private, Germany's generals start to worry about the scale of the task in front of them.
There were stories of generals saying, "Christ, isn't this country big?" in German. Russia was so vast that to cover it was a logistical problem that was very hard to overcome.
Far from home, what most people can't see is that the German war machine is stumbling. Hitler, the self-styled military genius, is about to encounter harsh reality.
Discover the past with exclusive military history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians, all on History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to watch everything, from the gripping story of the Band of Brothers to Operation Barbarossa and D-Day. Immerse yourself in the dramatic stories of this remarkable era by signing up via the link in the description.
At the German High Command, Hitler's generals plan their next move in the war against the Soviet Union. Many are now seriously alarmed by the task in front of them. But Hitler won't listen. Instead, he calls them daily, demanding they keep pushing forward.
Hitler never let his generals relax. He called them and he would go through some of their timetabling and say, "Go faster," which is a fine thing to say. But you can't make tanks and lorries and personnel move at a speed other than what is allowed by the logistics of it.
Hitler's generals do what they can. But then something happens over which they have no control. The Russian winter sets in. Temperatures drop to -32 Fahrenheit. Outside Moscow, the ground freezes solid to a depth of 5 feet.
You couldn't urinate in the open air. Fuel would freeze in machinery. Literally, the German war machine was just frozen. And it wasn't just frozen, it was starving. Probably the best you're going to be able to get your hands on is raw horseflesh, because you wouldn't want to start cooking it, because the smoke would leave your cellar and tell the Russians where you were.
In the face of these appalling conditions, the German army outside Moscow is finally forced to beat a tactical retreat. For Hitler, it's a serious setback. He's promised the German people the Soviet Union will be conquered in 6 weeks. It's now taken over 5 months. How can he keep his promise of a quick war when the reality is so different? Once again, Joseph Goebbels' propaganda machine rolls into action. His solution? Simply to lie. He launches a barrage of propaganda. Newsreels show German soldiers enjoying the snow and routing a Russian rabble.
Goebbels made sure that stirring and exciting newsreels were a regular component of the German cinema goers' diet. He had propaganda companies in action, literally, with the frontline troops. And he constantly urged his propaganda crews to get as far forward as possible, to get the most exciting footage.
Hitler, far from misjudging the war with the Soviet Union, is presented as a great military and strategic genius. But is the propaganda barrage working? Goebbels has a well-developed system for finding out. He sends out spies to eavesdrop and record conversations. The news is all positive.
There was a cinema in every German town, even in very small towns. And we know from internal opinion reports within Germany that the population responded with enormous enthusiasm to these propaganda newsreels. They could hardly believe the exciting, dramatic scenes of German military success.
Goebbels was a lover of movies and took part very much in casting a lot of films, and Hitler was a big movie buff as well. So they very much felt that cinema was a great way of connecting with the German people.
Goebbels has excelled himself. It's a brilliant propaganda campaign. But then there's a new and totally unexpected development. Without warning, Japanese planes bomb the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The following day, the US declares war on Japan.
Since the unprovoked and dastardly attack, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
For Hitler, it's a critical moment. Japan is an ally. Should he let the Japanese and Americans fight it out? Or should he side with his Japanese friends? It's a momentous decision, yet Hitler ponders it alone. The case against taking on America is obvious.
America was an economic power, a kind of sleeping giant, and he knew that it had massive economic resources that, if turned into military resources, could ultimately affect his ability to win the Second World War.
Yet, for Hitler, that's only part of the picture. As he turns the situation over in his mind, the case for supporting Japan is also strong. The two countries have an understanding to back one another. There's a good chance Japanese forces will tie down America in the Pacific and prevent her supporting Britain on the Western Front. But above all, Hitler believes the Americans lack what the Germans have: the stomach for a fight.
Hitler viewed America with complete contempt as a mongrel racial melting pot which was full of Hispanics and Jews and was racially worthless.
He thought the Americans were effete, that they'd accept terms that would leave Germany in control of Europe and leave Japan in control of the Pacific.
Finally, after only the briefest consultation, Hitler makes his decision. Four days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, he addresses the German parliament. Germany will declare war on America.
What's remarkable about that decision to go to war with America in 1941 is how easily it was made. Hitler didn't seem to have pondered on it for too long.
There's a gasp from the assembled ranks, but they're all Nazis, and he explains that we could not wait for developments to overrun us. We have to take the initiative.
America was seen as somewhere very far away, somewhere that couldn't really hurt Germany too seriously.
It's a huge decision, yet Hitler has taken it almost unilaterally. It will go down in history as his biggest blunder. German forces, already bogged down in Russia, now face the most powerful country in the world. Germany is about to be hit by a series of ferocious hammer blows that will shatter Hitler's image as a great war leader and transform the war. In Germany, the impact of Hitler's decision to go to war with America is felt almost immediately. There's a dawning realization that this is no longer going to be a short war. In private, there are bitter jokes. A candidate for the Waffen-SS is asked, "Are you willing to sign on for the whole war?" "No," he says. "Only the first 12 years." In bars and restaurants, Goebbels' spies listen to the gossip and detect a drop in public morale. It's time for a new initiative. In early December, in a speech to Nazi Party regional officials, Hitler makes a new promise.
He sees himself as the great military leader. This is the remarkable thing about the Führer, that it's not just a domestic leader. He is the great Napoleon. He's Frederick the Great. He's Caesar.
Hitler argues that victory is at hand. It will still be a short war, and it will be followed by a glorious future in which Germany will grow rich on the land and labor of the occupied territories of the East.
He wants to be seen as the man who knows what best serves German interests militarily.
And at first, it looks as though Hitler's prediction is coming true. Spring on the Eastern Front brings warmer weather. The German Sixth Army goes back on the offensive. The industrial city of Stalingrad is besieged. The Soviet defenders are corralled in a tiny strip of land along the river Volga. Tens of thousands face a brutal death.
Stalingrad is the most brutal type of fighting. No one would be the same after Stalingrad. Urban warfare is uniquely messy, and Stalingrad was a uniquely messy form of that type of warfare.
The Germans appear to have victory in their sights. But then, the battle changes. In a brilliant series of flanking moves, the Russians smash through the German lines from the north and south. They meet to the west of the city, completely encircling the Germans. Suddenly, the tables are reversed. Around 250,000 German troops are cut off from their supply lines. The German forces soon run low on everything, from ammunition to food.
You had lice all over your clothes. You had to eat and drink the little food you could next to your comrades defecating right next to you, because if you tried to go out to go to the toilet, you'd be shot at by a Russian sniper up on a roof.
The situation is untenable. The only thing that will save the Germans is a tactical retreat. Hitler, by now, has moved his headquarters to a huge complex of bunkers in eastern Poland. The Wolf's Lair, as it's known, is Hitler's new base, over 400 miles from the military command in Berlin. Here, far from the sight of the German people, Hitler holds a crisis meeting. Most of his senior military leaders call for a strategic withdrawal. The alternative, an entire army will be wiped out. But Hitler takes another unilateral decision. The Germans will stand and fight to the last man.
The Führer wouldn't sanction retreat. Good Nazis, the Wehrmacht doesn't retreat. It wins by going forward.
Very good idea.
He believes in staying at your post and dying if you have to, but you do not retreat. Absurd strategically, absurd militarily.
To Hitler's generals, this can only spell disaster. But one man sees an opportunity. Hermann Goering has a reputation as a powerful and effective leader.
Hermann Goering had been an able and brave First World War soldier pilot. Genuinely won decorations. He understood war. He'd fought it. He'd been in it.
Goering has been in the Nazi Party since 1922. He had turned the brown shirts from a rabble into a formidable fighting force. And he'd been injured in Hitler's 1923 beer hall putsch. As head of the Luftwaffe and Hitler's anointed successor, he occupies imposing offices in the center of Berlin, not far from Hitler's headquarters.
Hitler had great faith, justifiable faith, in Goering. His policies, his strategies seemed to be working. Build up the Luftwaffe into a mighty force, which would provide the means of blitzkrieg and would provide the means of attacking enemies.
His air force had proved decisive in the conquest of much of Europe.
He proved a very able commander indeed, one of the greatest, one would say, of the Second World War.
He's a man Hitler has learnt to respect. Goering now backs Hitler's refusal to sanction a retreat from Stalingrad. He suggests, instead, the army can be reinforced by airdrops using his Luftwaffe. Hitler enthusiastically embraces the idea. Yet Goering is not the man he once was, nor is his judgment. The man the German people believe is a mighty commander is in fact a drug addict. He's now heavily dependent on morphine. It's changed his behavior and clouded his mind.
Hermann Goering, in his early career, had been an intelligent and very capable man, had drifted into indolence and apathy.
He's also developed an all-consuming new interest. Looted artifacts from across Europe have been pouring into Germany.
In every country the Nazis occupied, their armed forces were rapidly followed by teams tasked with a mission to bring back to Germany cultural artifacts. These ranged from literary manuscripts through to paintings and sculptures.
At the heart of this operation is Goering.
Goering thought of himself as a connoisseur and a great expert in matters of art and culture, but he has an eye to the business. He wants money.
He would draw up an order for the kind of paintings that he'd like to have brought to him at his country estate.
The me part of Goering is fascinating.
By 1942, he's amassed a huge collection of stolen artworks.
He has something like 1,200 precious objects and paintings in his personal possession.
Goering is not alone in his passion for self-enrichment.
There's hardly an official in Germany who doesn't dabble in this great project. It's on a massive scale, which is why it couldn't be controlled, because everybody had a skeleton in the cupboard.
Goering's preoccupation with drugs and art mean he's no longer an effective commander or a good judge of the military situation. His relief of Stalingrad is a disaster. He doesn't have enough planes or fuel. The promised airdrop turns into a farce.
The estimate that was given was that it would require something like 800 tons daily to keep those soldiers supplied. The reality was that they managed under 100 tons per day.
A soldier writes home,
"We live on one piece of bread between 8 and a taste of warm water."
The German position in Stalingrad becomes untenable. Finally, at the end of the month, the German commander defies Hitler and surrenders. Nearly 100,000 German soldiers are taken prisoner, including 24 generals. When news reaches Hitler at the Wolf's Lair, he's appalled. It's a catastrophe so large, it will be impossible to hide from the German people. Once again, the man who has to break the news is Joseph Goebbels. He realizes this is going to require a new message. Out goes the idea of a quick victory. In comes the idea of a uniquely German grit and heroism.
The theme here, as in many other utterances from this time, is that true German heroism only comes to the fore in the face of defeat and immense suffering.
Seid ihr bereit, mit dem Führer als Phalanx der Heimat hinten behaupten?
Goebbels spells out his new theme in a speech many regard as the high point of his career.
Underneath a big banner saying "Total War, Shortest War," Goebbels talks to an audience of 14,000 cheering and admiring fans.
It's an appeal to the morale of the people to, in a sense, shift gear from support for the war, which was based initially on enthusiasm for the quick victory and the speed of the conquest, and now shifts towards this idea of endurance and embracing suffering.
And towards the end of the speech, he perorates on these 10 rhetorical questions that demand ever-increasingly loud yeses from the audience. Do you want a total war? And they all shout, yes! He then says, do you want a total war that's even more radical and brutal than you can possibly think of? And they go, yes, of course we do.
But Goebbels also has a second message. The talk of German heroism is underpinned by fear.
Goebbels increasingly put before the German people a nightmare vision where they would be driven out of their ancestral lands in the East, their women would be raped, their young people enslaved and deported to Siberia. They had no choice but to fight on.
It's a message most Germans are willing to go along with. But now, for the first time, there's also open opposition. In Munich, a group of students calling themselves the White Rose Group circulate anti-Nazi leaflets and daub anti-Hitler graffiti.
They would go around universities throughout Germany putting up little posters saying things like Hitler mass murderer, or simply the word freedom. It seems a great example of how totalitarian the regime had become, that even to post the word freedom up on a wall was considered against the state.
The opposition is quickly snuffed out. But the German people are about to face another hammer blow. For 18 months, American arms and troops have been pouring across the Atlantic. The most powerful industrial country in the world has gone on a war footing.
What America can do is to turn its factories into places that can produce aeroplanes and tanks very, very swiftly.
Aircraft production soars. Car factories roll out thousands of tanks. Typewriter factories convert to machine gun production.
And the result is predictable. It's absolutely catastrophic for the Germans.
In the early summer of that year, American troops joined British forces in routing the Germans in North Africa. A month later, the Western Allies cross the Mediterranean and invade Italy.
And that is a shock to many German military who see that this is where the war against the USA is now turning against German interests.
The Americans, once dismissed by Hitler as a feat, are attacking his soft underbelly. Within weeks, the Italian fascist leader Benito Mussolini is overthrown in a popular uprising. Germany loses its most important European ally. Italy's new leaders talk of surrender. Now, at last, the full folly of Hitler's declaration of war on America is apparent. Hitler gets the news at the Wolf's Lair. He's horrified. Mussolini is one of his oldest and most faithful allies.
Hitler was deeply disturbed by the failure of Mussolini. He'd had a deep affection for Mussolini as a leader, and some say some affection for him as a person, insofar as he had feelings.
The Führer orders German troops into Italy to hold back the advancing Allied forces. But this means spreading the German army very thinly. They're being pushed back in Russia. They face the threat of a renewed Allied attack in the West. And they're trying to hold Italy and the Mediterranean coast. But then something happens that's impossible to spin as anything but dreadful. Over the skies of Germany, Allied aircraft bomb the country's cities day and night.
The bombing of Germany became far more serious in early 1943, and from then on to the end of the war, it became an ever-present, a nightly horror for German cities.
In August that year, Hamburg, one of Germany's most important industrial cities, is devastated in a firestorm. At least 40,000 people die. Hitler responds with a highly significant shift in domestic policy. That summer, Hitler appoints Heinrich Himmler, the much-feared head of the SS, Minister of the Interior. Himmler is a fanatical Nazi, a man who likes to foster the image of a dashing fighter.
He lives for the Führer. He lives for the greatness of the German cause, and everything subordinated to that. Frightening man, one of the most disturbing of all the Nazis.
Himmler's appointment is a clear sign Hitler can no longer rely on the goodwill of his people. From now on, his position will depend on repression. But even now, most Germans have no idea just how awful their situation really is. Hidden from sight, the man they've put their faith in is in deep, personal trouble. The Führer has withdrawn almost entirely to his bunker at the Wolf's Lair in East Poland. He's simply unable to accept the reality of the situation.
The German people start to realise that they haven't seen Hitler for a while. There are certain key events where Hitler would normally turn up to, such as Heroes' Day, a kind of memorial for those who had fallen, and that year Hitler didn't come, and that was very much noticed.
He sits there every evening having his dinner, surrounded by his secretaries increasingly, because he doesn't want to talk to his generals, because they'll only tell him bad news. He's not yet 55 years of age, but he seems to be a man who's moving more slowly. He's not the old Hitler that he was. He's losing his energy.
He goes for long walks with his dog. He became very stooped, and he starts to tremble, possibly what we think now Parkinson's.
Hitler is now almost entirely dependent on the company of just two people. One is his girlfriend, Eva Braun.
He phones Eva Braun every day, which thing he'd never done before, to get some solace from her conversation.
The other is his personal doctor. Theodor Morell is administering large quantities of antidepressants and homegrown narcotics.
Not only are the drugs themselves pretty potent and noxious, there's also an extraordinary amount of drugs. For example, we have here one testoviron. He was on Tempidorm, a barbiturate suppository. He was on Sympathol. He was on Quadranox, which is a sedative. He was on Orchicrin, Optolidon, which is a painkiller and analgesic. He was on something called Obstanol, which was to help with acute and chronic constipation.
Yet the German public remain utterly oblivious of the fact that Hitler is a shadow of his former self. His position has always depended on success hiding the shocking reality of his regime. But now he's losing the war. The German people will inevitably start waking up to the truth. And some, at last, will fight back.